Okay, hi Art, how are you?
Hi, Douglas. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. Your bio is very interesting. Right off the bat, I wanted to ask you U.S. Air Force School of Aerospace Medicine. And initially, I thought this is for people who are going to practice medicine in space.
Well, that's a good summation. It's actually a training program for both flight attendants. Uh, we do with the FAA, but more importantly, with the military, we work with flight nursing and we work with doctors who would treat patients either in an airplane or below the surface using hyperbaric medicine chambers. So it's the effects, the physiological effects on the body during flight, and also if we're treating people for like gangrene, osteomyelitis, carbon monoxide poisoning, stuff like that.
Right, because when I saw space, I'm thinking space shuttle astronauts, but aerospace includes airplanes and not quite as
And
high as
lots of
space.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's a real interesting field. I mean, there's not a great demand for us out in the public spectrum, but in the military, obviously, with all the flight nursing and stuff we have at that time, Vietnam War was just wrapping up, but we were transporting a lot of patients and stuff. So the physiology was real important in understanding what was going on.
So you also mentioned underwater. So this would be for people like the bends and nitrogen narcosis and things like that.
Anything that happens with a diver, that's correct. Or someone who we use as a treatment mechanism. For example, we can take people down to 1 to 2 atmosphere. We could work with someone who has, let's say, osteomyelitis. We could use some 100% oxygen in a cuff, and we could help correct that procedure much quicker and heal the skin much quicker by debriding with oxygen like that under pressure than we could if we did it on the surface. So there was a lot of research being done at that time for treatment of various things, including burns from big aircraft disasters and so forth.
It also says you had a very unique teaching style. What was unique about your style?
I was one of these guys. Most of the professors and teachers that I worked around used a podium and had textbooks lined up and would reference a lot. And I would just do a lot of study in advance. And although we didn't have slideshows back then, we had opaque projectors and a few other things. I would be very creative with my style, not use the podium, get real interactive and involved with all of my students. And students found that to be much more enjoyable and much easier to learn that way because I was a hands-on, very knowledgeable, and could answer their questions on the spot without having to reference anything. So it was very unique for that time when most people were standing up behind podiums and staying pretty straight. I was out moving around using my hands and my body language to help teach and emphasize things.
Well, that's great. I've always found those sort of presentations to be much more interesting. The ones with the podium and the pointing at the screen behind them, those are real sleepers most of the
Those are real
time.
sleepers.
Yeah.
You're right.
But when you get,
Exactly.
yeah, when you get people involved and you get people asking questions and getting excited, I think your comprehension is a lot better that way too. You remember it, you learn, you
Of course, and
retain
you
it.
can emphasize things if you have a little bit of movement with your body and your hands, and you can use better inflection. You're not tied down to reading something or being attached to a book. So you have all this role playing that you can do with someone who has some questions, and put them in the situation that they're actually in, so they can get a realistic opinion of what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
I saw a couple of videos of Steve Jobs doing presentations. He was really good, I thought.
He was good. Yeah, he's a great speaker. There's some great ones out there, and there's some guys that make a good living at being pretty plain. My speaking has always been no podium, outside the box. I do create my own visuals. So if I do slides in a training company that I still own, I have slides that I actually walk on. So I walk on the slides, so you're still learning while I'm talking. So instead of pointing to it, I'm actually on the slides. You can watch me, you can watch the slide, you can gather the information. There's three different ways for people to impact their learning skills, and they're either going to do it visual, auditory, or kinesthetic by writing something down. So I've always tried to engage all three to maximize the teaching experience that someone can have and their learning experience.
Are you still doing speaking? I mean, I know COVID has kind of shut that down, but
COVID changes a lot, as you well know. But I do engagements. I still do poetry reading with my book. I do some visual stuff and virtual stuff. I'm looking forward to COVID wrapping up. I've got my two vaccines. I'm hoping the rest of America catches up so that I can get out and do what I do best, and that is to help teach people how to have a better life, a better time, whether it's alcohol addiction or whether it's through just having a good day every day. I think we get so backtracked into the sorrow of our lives that we forget that we can always move forward.
you switched after the U.S. Air Force, you switched to the auto industry?
I did. I had a guy next door to me in San Antonio, Texas, that had two new cars, was making more in a month than I was making in 3 or 4 months, and he was selling Fords at a local Ford dealership. And I thought to myself, I'd like to have what that guy has. I don't have any experience. So when I left teaching, it was basically for 2 years. I thought I'd be out of it. I would get in the car business, make some quick dollars, put it in the bank account. I was married with a couple of children, young children. And I found that when I got into the business, not only was it lucrative, but it was also an untrained industry. No one was teaching the business correctly to salespeople on how to be honest with integrity to sell cars. So I formed my first little training company and started training salespeople in my own dealership. And then as time went on, I ended up becoming a dealer and training quite a few people and then training companies after that. So it was a natural launch for me to get back into the academia portion of what I liked in my life, but really giving me the insight that I could teach an industry where people just weren't being taught very well.
I just had somebody on who does something similar to you, and I want to ask the same question and see what your response is and see if it differs from his. When you are training salespeople, what is the one particular thing that you see that they're doing wrong, particularly with the rookies, with the ones that are young, they're just starting out, with the technique? What is it that you may have noticed that a lot of them are getting wrong right off the bat?
That's a really good question. I actually have three things. They all fall into the same category. I have one that's called agenditis. That's a word I made up. But what it means is that when they go into a dealership and start working, they get very little training, and the manager that they have just says, go sell a car. So their only agenda is to try to sell something. They have nothing else in mind but to try to get to the end goal. The second thing that they lack is they lack product skill knowledge. They lack the ability to be able to take something and bring it alive. If it's a navigation system on a car, why do we have it? What does it do? What's the value of it? What did we used to have? And the third thing is they're not good listeners. Customers will tell you how they're going to buy a car if you just listen to them. And even if they're not buying today, my philosophy had always been that they're going to buy someday. Everybody drives 22 cars on average in their lifetime. If you don't sell them right now today, could you sell them next week or the following week, or could we sell them their second, third, or fifth car? So if you treat them with respect, know your product, don't have a predetermined agenda, just give them the information to make it work for them. And if you're able to listen to them and really listen to their needs and wants, you can become a great salesman in the car industry. And you have to tell the truth. If you mislead them on one little question, then you look like any other car salesman out there. You kind of have a metamorphosis where you look like that slick talking guy, and suddenly you're out of the loop for that person. So,
do you think there's still the sort of fear of car salesmen in our society? Because car salesmen have kind of gotten a bad rap over the years.
I tell people who get in the industry, I said, this is one of the only industries you can get into with any background and earn six figures a year by telling the truth in an industry that's not known for telling the truth. You can stand out really quickly if you're really sincere about making this a career. And that means follow-up, staying in touch with people. That means listening. That means practicing your skill sets. That means working with other people. That means doing things out of the ordinary, get involved with community events. There's so many things that someone in the car business can do that becomes a big part of the community. When I grew up in a small town in Indiana, the guy that owned the local car dealership was funding the band, buying instruments. They were doing parades at the floats. And now, people think they run and hide someplace, although you have some great charitable car dealerships out there and some big organizations. And people are getting more trained than they used to, but it's still an issue that when I would tell people I was a car guy, they'd hide their keys from me, they put their money back in their pocket, they take their rings off, because it wasn't a good thing, especially when you went from teaching and suddenly you're selling, cars someplace in California. So
that led you to what? Why don't you just tell us the transition and with the alcohol issues and...
Yeah, you know what is at first it's like anybody else. You start off as a weekend drinker around the barbecue with a few beers with your buddies, and then maybe you get on the bowling league. So maybe on a Thursday night you're drinking a little bit also, and then maybe there's some promotions, there's some other events going on, or you get on two bowling leagues, or you belong to a club, and so drinking becomes more of a consequential habit of some of the successes that you have and some of the events that you're involved with. So I found myself over a period of years in the auto industry getting involved with a little bit more drinking over a period of time. But when I got into the training industry, I joined a big international company and ended up flying all over the country. So I got credit for miles. I sat in first class, drinks were free. Things started adding up. And before I even realized that, I was consuming alcohol at a relatively significant level. Although I was never drunk and never got a ticket or a DUI, I knew that socially I was drinking past the point where I probably should. And eventually, when I sold a company that I had built and had a non-compete for a while, I ended up drinking morning, noon, and night. I ended up with nothing to do, basically semi-retired at a young age. And one day I woke up and I had esophageal varices, and that's where your blood vessels in your throat burst open, and I was literally bleeding out of my throat, and was given last rites at a hospital, and a doctor still put me back together, and so I quit drinking and decided that if I had a mission, I had a purpose now, it was to teach people that even intelligent people with a good background can drink way too much, and they can drink past the limit that they know they're drinking too much. It was time for me to help people, and that's why I decided to do what I did, write books and to talk to people about it.
So it took the near death for you to quit drinking. If that hadn't happened, you would have continued to drink?
That's hard to say because the near death really didn't stop me. I quit for about 3 months. It was just before my 60th birthday, almost 4 months, I guess. And someone on my 60th birthday gave me just a little shot of champagne, which was my drink of choice. I took that one little shot, and the next day I was buying champagne again. So after 2 months into February that year, I realized I had a serious drinking problem because I had quit for so long over bleeding to death, and I was back to buying bottles of champagne again. So I plotted out how I was going to solve my problem. I wanted to talk to my kids. I wanted to start figuring out a way that I could quit drinking. And so I was driving up Central California on Highway 99, and one day decided to stand on a bridge between Portland and Vancouver, Washington, and jump. I made the fatal mistake of standing on the bridge right where there was a big pylon sticking out. So if I jumped, I'd only go down 20 feet. And at the same time, a truck driver blew his horn at me. And I turned around and looked at him. He didn't say a word to me, but he had a red, dirty baseball cap on and kind of a scruffy beard and these piercing blue eyes. And what he said to me was, "Don't jump, you have a purpose." So I checked myself in for rehab at that point. I call that the angel in the truck. And I spent 13 days and committed to the fact that I was going to not drink again. And I knew on the 13th day I'd never drink again. So I made that commitment. And then I started through a program, of course, recovery with AA and the VA. Well, you never know how life is going to take you, in events, but, you suddenly find yourself. I thought I was at my rock bottom and it was time for me to do something about it. I just visit my grandkids and, things weren't going well. I was still drinking. I was drinking too much. I'd already quit for that short period of time. And I thought this is kind of an endless gig for me. I think it's time for me to check out. But fate would have it that it wasn't my time. And now I've devoted the last 10 and 11 years to working with people who drink and to talking about my poems that I write and the events that I have. And assisting people to have a better life, whether it's through alcohol addiction, whether it's just realizing that if you treat every day like your last, it's remarkable how well you'll treat it.
I've heard that expression said in two different ways. Treat every day like it's your last, but also treat every day like you're going to live forever.
That's correct. Every day, I have a motto for my company. It's pretty simple. It says, everything that you say and do today will determine what all of your tomorrows look like and become. And if you realize that you're responsible for everything you say, everything you do, you can't blame anybody else. And so you're also in charge of your tomorrows. You get to create them. Yesterday's done. It's a canceled check. Tomorrow's promissory. Today is cash. Invest it wisely.
What about regret? Is there any regrets? Or do you just look at what has happened as this is what it is and now I moved on?
Well, I think there's, part of recovery is we do our amends. We go back and apologize to anybody that we may have harmed. If it's okay that we're not going to harm them by apologizing to them or affect someone else in their life. But one of the adages in recovery is real important is that to grant me to realize there are certain things that I cannot change. And if you realize you can't change them, then you can't dwell on them. There's nothing that you can do to ever affect that event other than to have learned from it, to become more positive about who you are and to move forward in your life from there. So regrets are part of recovery, but they're not the whole basis for recovery. Amends and saying you're sorry is what's really important, recognizing that you have the problem and then being willing to step forward in society and do good things and stay in recovery. Recovery is statistically, it's a tough haul. It takes a little bit of work.
My father had issues with alcohol, and I've known a couple of friends who had issues with drugs, and it's the one day at a time. And every day gets a little bit better and a little bit better. And it's not an easy road.
The first year is, there's only about 25 to 27% of the people who make it their whole first year. So that shows you about 2/3 of the people who try recovery relapse. But relapse is also part of recovery. There are some lessons to learn from a relapse, and perhaps the second time you'll be stronger. If you make it to a year, you've got about a 50-50 shot that you'll make it to 5 years. So your chances now increase. And if you make it to 5 years, your chances are even better. You've got a 20% or so chance of recovery and of staying there permanently. So alcohol is a commitment, like you said, one day at a time, but it's also a mindset. It's where you have to realize that as you breathe your air and as you make your decisions, as you do your things and say your things, that if you hold yourself accountable for those and do good things and stay away from bad things, your life gets better.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and let's cover your books real quickly. You've got 2 books, is that right?
I do. I have the first one, which was it's called Self-Inflicted Death Sentence. This one I wrote while I was in recovery over a period of 37 weeks with 37 different poems. Highlights both the struggles of going through recovery and the first glimpses of staying in recovery, some of the temptations and stuff that come your way. I just did the second edition of this in December of last year. And then the book that I just finished is called Free Booze Canceled. And this is 10 years of recovery. It has 10 poems in it, plus some bonus material. And it talks about how to get through 10 years. The value of time, the value of your energy, the value of giving back. I have a poem in there that says, "Give back like a Boy Scout." Where I just talk about if you just had the 12 rules of scouting into your life now: trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Imagine how much goodness you could do as an adult with those premises that you learned as a Boy Scout when you were young. So both books are in poetry. They're both designed to inform, educate, stimulate conversation, make you think. If you have someone in your life that's an alcoholic that drinks, it gives you an understanding of perhaps where they are and maybe how you might be able to guide them toward them making the decision, because they have to make the decision that they want to stop drinking. You can't do it for them.
I love the title on that one. And I got to say that anywhere that there's free booze is such a bad idea.
It is. Or I always tell people it's not the $2.99 pitcher of beer that you get at the bar. It's the long-term costs that come up 20 years later that affect that drink that you had that day. So.
Right. And I mean, the casinos in Las Vegas, where I am, are certainly smart enough to know that if they hand out free drinks to people gambling, they'll just continue to gamble and drink. So they got. Of
course, I was one of those. At one time, I had to quit gambling too. Imagine that.
Unbelievable. They're just promoting addiction in those places. Yeah.
They do, and people start drinking as young as 12 now. There's statistics from 12 to 17. There's a number of kids that drink for the first or second time. Addiction starts early. Binge drinking is really popular. They don't drink for a while, then they spend a whole weekend drinking, and that kills people. That kills them either health for themselves or kills somebody else. It's just dangerous. So we have a society that has promoted booze for all of its life. It still does, and it's a tough disease to get past if you're one of those people who suffer from alcohol addiction. It's tough.
Well, Art, we got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
I do. You can reach me at www.artwedmore.com. And Wedmore is W-E, D as in David, M-O-R-E. So www.artwedmore.com.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.